Good evening. It's 6:30 p.m. and I'd like to call the October 30th Fergus Implementation Special Committee meeting of the South Orange Maplewood Board of Education to order. Mr. Burnside, can you please take the roll call?
Board Member Nubia Duvall-Wilson.
Here.
Board Member Regina Acker.
Here.
Board Member Bill Gifford. Board Member Alyssa Malaspina.
Here.
Board Member Kali Telesford.
Here.
Board Member Arun Vadlamani.
Here.
Board Member Courtney Wingfield.
Here.
Board President Caitlin Whitletter.
Here.
Board Member Johanna Wright. Thank you.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Please take note that adequate notice of this meeting has been provided in the following manner. A written notice was sent from the Office of the Secretary of the Board at 9:30 a.m. on October 16th, 2023. That said notice was sent via email to Maplewood and South Orange Township clerks and the editors of the News Record, Star Ledger, and the Village Green. Tonight is our first Implementation Special Committee meeting. Fergus Implementation Special Committee meeting. The purpose of this committee is to assist the board in its oversight role to ensure the district's compliance with the Black Parents Workshop settlement during the 3-year monitoring phase. The objective of the committee is to ensure that all of Dr. Fergus's recommendations from the Equity Audit Report are implemented by August 2026. Please note tonight's presentation from the district will include the district's 3-year vision of implementation of Dr. Fergus's recommendations, the timeline and sequencing of priorities of Dr. Fergus's recommendations, the funding commitments tied to each of the recommendations and what the budget implications would look like over the next 3 school years, and a list of responsible parties within the district who will be responsible for ensuring the 23 recommendations are being implemented within the designated timelines. After the district presentation, we will have 1 public speaks, and then the board will adjourn the public meeting to go into closed session. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Gilbert. Oh, sorry. Board Member Malaspina is recused from participation in the meeting as she has a conflict. So just wanted to make sure that folks are clear on that. And thank you, Dr. Gilbert.
Thank you. To the members of our Board of Education, to the public, I'm Dr. Kevin Gilbert. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Access and Equity. And in the absence of our superintendent, who we hope is getting well, who's not feeling well, I will be presenting tonight's presentation on the Fergus recommendations. Also have my timer set here, so make sure I So you go to the next slide. So as the president of the board pointed out, this presentation is going to cover a lot of information. What we hope to do over the course of these monthly meetings is to really dig deep into this. This first slide is what we're calling the guided philosophy behind the implementation work. It comes from page 8 of the Fergus recommendations report. And the 2 big pieces I want to point out that I think is important for the public to hear, as well as us to remind us as the board, that Dr. Fergus says in the opening part of his report, it is recommended that the district undertake a systemic push towards renorming their school policies, pedagogy, and curriculum towards more culturally responsive and inclusive norms, in particularly centering the needs of Black and Latinx populations and free and reduced lunch eligible families in the school district's program. And I think it's important that we talk about the work that we're doing, the plan that we put together, had that focus in mind that we're centering this work on the most marginalized in our BIPOC communities. But that's important for the rest of the public to know that he goes on to say that, therefore, in the interim, it is crucial that the district also create spaces where all families, students, and educators can process these changes. Families who have typically had access to the most resources will struggle to adjust to a system that is more equitable. Families who have typically been overlooked may struggle to build trust. So what this is telling us is that throughout this process, we're going to have to be very intentional about making sure that we have conversations and open conversations to understand that, you know, nobody's getting things taken away from them. It's about how we can help benefit all of our students within our school system. Next slide, please. So the next few slides are going to go over what the recommendations are. These are the curriculum and instruction recommendations that Dr. Fergus and the Rutgers team gave us. One, to prioritize materials and verbal messaging regarding math growth mindset. Two, to foster heterogeneous student collaboration in math instruction. Three, to ensure that low-track students receive high quality instruction that they need to become better math students. Four, create a clear plan and timeline to identify high-achieving students from underrepresented backgrounds for higher-track math courses. Five, to create enrichment and acceleration opportunities. Six, to increase accessible and equitable parent involvement. And seven, to revisit choice policy for math course selection. Next slide, please. The intervention recommendations was to develop a district-wide tiered system of support that includes defining academic and behavioral tiers available to processes for utilization. Number two, extensive review of the INRS implementation process guide in order to address inconsistencies and redundancies. Three, develop a list of tiered interventions for academic behavioral support. And four, develop tools and protocols for the operation of intervention team meetings. Next slide, please. Then there were a series of recommendations that talked about developing a pedagogical capacity with the equity lens. I will stay here. We won't read these every time, so this will be the only time that I'm going to read through all of these recommendations. As we meet monthly, we'll just kind of show these slides. Number one, develop and implement a professional development series that focuses on the continued development, cross-cultural capacity in order to replace bias-based beliefs such as colorblindness, deficit thinking, and racial discomfort. Number two, continuous assessment of educator knowledge on the intervention support systems, curriculum, and instructional and improvements. Number three, through professional development, build teacher empathy for all students. Events such as the Middle School Challenge Day create a humanistic bond between teachers and students. Number four, conduct a curriculum audit of courses in humanities, English language arts, and history using the culturally responsive protocol to determine where more inclusive materials and pedagogies are needed. Number five, hire more Black teachers, teachers of color, and create affinity spaces to support those teachers to increase retention. Six, build on the successes of the affinity spaces for the students of color, such as MAC scholars. And number seven, provide affinity spaces for BIPOC students across school levels. BIPOC, for those who are listening, means Black, Indigenous, people of color. Next slide, please. Then he had 5 recommendations for our intentional integration. One, to use further modeling of integration in which factors with the greatest skewed patterns are weighed more intensely over other factors. For instance, household income and parent education could be weighed more than race and ethnicity. Number two, the pattern of average household income and parent educational levels should be examined over time in order to understand whether the III plan can be sustained. Number three, a staged integration that prioritizes Seth Boyden and South Mountain over the next several years. Number four, review pre-COVID quarantine school years, 2018-19, 17-18, to understand the withdrawal patterns. And then number five, the III plan needs to parallel the integration of academic support services. Oh, wow. All right. So let's go through the first set of recommendations. And so this is, there will be a more extensive presentation available online. So some of this presentation will just focus on bits and pieces that I want to highlight. And so we're going to begin with our curriculum and instruction recommendations. Some of the key points that I want to call out that you're going to see in this first recommendation, which deals with growth mindset. We're going to be looking at professional learning and growth using the Stanford University 6 through 12 and K5 as part of the professional learning package. We're going to create and implement a survey tool for growth mindset. We're going to update curriculum using rich math tasks and principal teacher feedback. What you're looking at right now is the actual recommendation, and we have SMART goals. So the board, you all received our implementation plan, which includes the recommendation, a SMART goal, and then this slide also shows you the kind of data sources. So this particular goal for this one is we're going to use a variety of teaching strategies, including direct instruction on growth mindset, low floor, high ceiling problem solving, and other tools to help our teachers increase the student understanding and use of the growth mindset as measured in the student growth surveys and feedback groups. And some of the survey data we're going to use are surveys about growth mindset, feedback groups, student work sample analysis, and teacher leader feedback. And the group that will be responsible for helping us maintain this will be our supervisors of K-8, 9, 12, as well as the Office of Curriculum and Instruction. So this is the action steps. I won't read all of these action steps for you, but this is kind of how the plan goes. So as you look at it, we show you year 1, we plan to do these 5 steps. Year 2, we plan to do these steps. In year 3, and then year 4 and 5, you'll see on some of the slides that that's blank because year 4 and 5 will kind of depend on where we are in year 3. The course of the implementation will look like this throughout the evening and on the plan document. And here are things, and one of the things I want to highlight is we tried to be intentional about putting things in there like meeting with teacher and principal groups to get feedback. We also wanted to make sure we put things in there about evaluating and looking at survey data and things like that, because that's going to be important because we got to use that kind of data to kind of drive some of the decision making that we're going to do. Next slide, please. The next recommendation dealt with fostering a heterogeneous student collaboration. The SMART goal here is we're going to be reframing the current middle school math course pathway to create more heterogeneous opportunities for students. The group that's going to be responsible for helping us to kind of oversee this particular work will be again, the STEM supervisors, K-8, 9 through 12, instructional coaches also, and the Office of Curriculum and Instruction. And you can see our data sources that we're going to use here, benchmark assessments, current enrollment data in math climate data, and focus groups. Next slide, please. And here again is our 3-year plan. Again, I won't read all of this information to you, but you can see it's very detailed in some of the action steps. And again, just like in the previous slide, the things I want to highlight is professional learning around collaborative learning is embedded in this. We also want to look at, again, meeting with our teachers and our leaders to get their feedback on what some of this work looks like. And then we also are going to be being very intentional about being inclusive as we move towards this more heterogeneous approach. You'll hear more about each of these as we go throughout our different meetings. This is just kind of setting the stage for what the work's going to look like. Next slide, please. High quality instruction is the next recommendation. Our SMART goal is we're going to review and revive all academic math curriculum in order to align the goals, essential questions, learning tasks to higher level cognitive skills measured by curriculum board approved in 2023 and provide training for teachers in those areas. You can see the various data sources we're going to need. I know one of the questions that was asked, the supervisors of STEM, K-8 and 9 through 12 will be the primary group that'll be monitoring this particular recommendation. Next slide, please. And here again is our 3-year plan. Just some highlights. You can see that we're going to be using curriculum writers who are going to get professional learning to kind of help look at what the higher level task and building those essential questions, what they look like. We're going to provide teachers and curriculum writers with that professional learning so that they can break apart and understand some of what the New Jersey learning standards are going to be. And then by year 3, we hope to continuously review all of this information and at that particular point have this recommendation fully implemented. And in year 4 and 5, we're going to evaluate what we did from years 1, 2, and 3 and do an assessment. Next slide, please. Increase students from underrepresented backgrounds for higher track math courses. We're going to continue to implement this through our work with equal opportunity schools using their methodology, but taking that methodology and moving it into the middle schools is one of the goals that we want to do, right? So the methodology that we learn, the things around trusted adults, the things that have helped grown the AP enrollment, we want to try to see if we can scale some of that into our middle schools to try to meet those students at an earlier age to see if we can move them into higher level classes. Next slide, please. And this here is our 3-year implementation plan. You can see there's more actions happening this year because we want to make sure we be very intentional this year about locking in the work that we need to do. This is where we introduce not only the EOS work, but the Naglieri tool that we're going to be using to help the universal screener to try to help and see where our kids, where our students are located at. And we're going to also use a lot of survey data to look at barriers and how we break those barriers down. And by year 3, we hope to have a clear course of action as it pertains to completing this particular recommendation. Next slide, please. I forgot to tell you, for that particular recommendation, again, the Office of Curriculum and Instruction and Access and Equity, of course, and our building administrators and our guidance group will be helping make sure we achieve that goal. The next recommendation, enrichment and acceleration opportunities. Our SMART goal, the district will implement enrichment and acceleration in mathematics through professional learning, additional option and additional courses over a 5-year period. Next slide. And here are the action steps. And you can see we actually built this one out to 4 years because there's a lot of work in the first 2 years that we're going to be doing. So we have to kind of move it out a little bit longer. So also we want to note that I want to just let people know that this is a breathing document, right? So we're going to be using this document to move, and we're always going to be assessing. So some of these action steps could change based on what we do the previous year. We'll go back and look at steps 1 through 8. If we don't achieve all of those, then we might move some to year 2, but we're going to be constantly looking at data, monitoring what we're going to do to kind of help inform our decisions as we move forward. Next slide, please. Parent involvement piece. This was recommendation 6, and it said increase accessible and equitable parent involvement. And our goal, of course, is we're going to pilot this through looking at our math selection process. Dr. Fergus and the Rutgers team was very specific about us being intentional about how we meet our families and helping to move them where we helping them with their growth mindset and moving their students into the courses that we think that we'd like them to go. We're going to be using class enrollment data and our family survey data. Next slide, please. And here is our 3-year implementation plan. Again, the first 2 years are a heavy dose of intentionality that we're going to be using to try to help move and build that recommendation up. Next slide. Math course selection. Revisit the choice policies for math. Now, this one is going to be the one that's going to really take some time because in his report, Dr. Fergus recommended that we use a matrix that had various factors. Now, you know, in our particular district, the only choice that we have for higher math courses is parental choice. We took away teacher recommendations. We took away we also took away using high stakes tests to determine that. Now, based on his report, what he says we can do is come up with a system that has multiple factors involved in how we do that selection. This is going to actually take us some time to really think about that because the more we want to keep it as unbiased as possible. One of the reasons we got rid of teacher recommendations was because of the amount of bias that sometimes could come into play when it comes to those. And so now we're talking about putting together a matrix where that could be back on the table, but we've got to just be very careful that we don't want to put a matrix that's going to be a barrier. Next slide, please. So we're doing an analysis this year. We're going to work with stakeholders to get from them on what their ideas around what a matrix could look like. We're going to gather that feedback this year, and we're going to pilot a matrix with a small group of students for next year, and hopefully have full implementation of whatever this matrix is going to look like for year 3. This is the one that's we really want to take our time, because we don't want to create an unnecessary barrier to our students being able to move into higher level classes. Next slide. The next one is our interventions in our INRS. Now, this is one that we've already begun serious implementation in. The first recommendation was to develop a district-wide tiered system of supports. And it said the district will develop this tiered system of support, academic for social emotional behavior needs within 3 years. We're using various data points to look at that. Next slide, please. But I want to highlight this one. This is the only time some of these key performance indicators that we use, but I want you to see by year 3, we really want to make sure we've decreased that overall risk ratio of the BIPOC students to special education. That was a huge part of Dr. Fergus's report, and we think by year 3, we've already instituted putting in the new manual. We're putting in the monitoring of our INRS processes. We're going to be looking at the data on who's being referred to special education. By year 3, we should see that risk ratio decreasing to where we want it to be, closer to that 1. Next slide, please. Here's the implementation steps. Again, just real quickly taking a look. We'll be breaking these down throughout our monthly meetings, so you'll hear more about this. Next slide, please. And then we combine recommendations 2, 3, and 4 because they all dealt with review of our INRS processes. You all received in a board packet our new manual. That's where a lot of this is housed, where we went through, we redid our manual, we put things in there about RTI, we put things in there about NJSS, New Jersey tier systems of support. And now we are working with we've trained our staff, we trained our teams who are working there, and we're going to be monitoring that from a central office perspective to make sure that everyone is following that so we can get that process in line, because that's how we're going to lower the risk ratio, by making sure our INRS processes is where they need to be. Next slide, please. These are the key performance indicators. Again, I wanted to put these here to see that we pretty much met the year 1 already. We've gotten the trainings going. We've gotten the new manual out. Next year, we should start, based on the results of this year, we're going to be fostering more closely family communication regarding INRS. I mean, we're working with our schools to communicate now, but more intentional in year 2 to make sure everyone understands what INRS is and what those processes look like. And then by year 3, we are actually looking at our successes, and we're also looking at needs of improvement in that particular area. But like I said, of all the recommendations, this is the one that we're probably way more advanced in, because we now have that new manual on our INRS systems. And I think this is also important because, like I say, as far as the state is concerned, we are not disproportionate with special education, but if you listen to Dr. Fergus, if we don't fix our INRS systems and we don't do something with that risk ratio, we're going to be disproportionate. So we're ahead of the curve. We really hope we don't want to become disproportionate with the state in that level. Next slide, please. And these are the action steps. Again, next slide. And then the last one in this kind of area of developing the pedagogical capacity within the equity lens. That word capacity is important because what we got to build is an infrastructure to sustain this work over time. So this recommendation deals with the implementation of a professional development series. We would develop a sustained DEI professional development track within the district over the next 5 years using those various data points. Next slide, please. Within this action plan, you'll see a lot of work in terms of building not only through the SEED program where we send a lot of our educators to, but also building a cadre of teachers within South Orange and Maplewood School District who can help us provide further professional development. One of the biggest things we heard from our teachers is they like to hear from their own. So we've got to build a capacity for our own to provide that sustained professional development. Next slide, please. The next one is teacher knowledge. How are we going to continuously do assessment of educator knowledge on intervention supports and systems Using observation models to staff and administrator, coaching input, and other data, the district will examine an understanding of the curriculum, instruction, and intervention support systems, using those particular data points that you see there to be some of our guiding data. Next slide. There are several things I wanted to highlight here on the performance indicators. First, if you can see in year one, we're going to be using our teacher evaluation as well as our leaders evaluation to monitor our performance and how we're doing with our professional development. This year, we'd like to see 80% of our teachers scoring either 3 or 4 in the planning and preparation, which is domain 1 of their evaluation, and the learning environment, which is domain 2. And for our leaders, we'd like to see them scoring at 80% of our leaders scoring in either accomplished or distinguished on knowledge of teaching and learning as well in their McCrell evaluation. If you see going forward each year, we're raising the bar on what percentage of teachers we like to see meet those, and leaders that we'd like to see meet those particular marks. By year 3, we're looking at 90% of our teachers and 90% of our leaders scoring in those preferred areas of growth to be our performance indicators. Next slide, please. And here is our action steps for those years 1, 2, and 3. Again, a lot of monitoring happening here. We're using our INRS data. That's the joy of making sure we get our INRS systems where we need them to be so we can monitor those, and then continue our professional learning growth. Next slide, please. Teacher empathy. To build teacher empathy by integrating restorative justice work and social emotional learning into the student and teacher daily experiences within 5 years. Part of the reframing around restorative justice culture and part of the work around social emotional learning is creating a container to build teacher empathy of all our teachers. We'll be using those data sources to see how we're doing and marking the work that we do going forward. Next slide, please. These are the action steps. This year is a lot of introducing, helping people see where we're trying to go. Next year, if you look at those action steps, a lot more intentional implementation planning happening. By year 3, we should we hope to have those systems in place, and we should be seeing along the way the progress that needs to be made. Next slide, please. The curriculum audit. This is another area where we've already been on our way. We began working on the curriculum audit at the end of last year and working with our supervisor, and now we're in our full court press in terms of implementing. The students will take part in a culturally responsive learning experience through a culturally responsive curriculum developed over the next 5 years. We're going to use focus groups, the completed audits, and some of our curriculum to gauge what we're doing. Next slide. Here are the action steps along the way. It's a gradual process as we're doing some courses this year. Next year, we'll do more courses. By year 3, we should be in a mode to where we're just recycling, going through and checking on where we are in terms of building that culture. Yep, my time's up. All right, I got two more. I think I'm almost done. Okay. John Cena, so y'all just let y'all into a little secret there. All right, next slide, please. Hiring teachers of color. This is a very important one out of the recommendations that Dr. Fergus gave. And our SMART goal here is we're going to create and implement a workforce diversity plan that intentionally focuses on the recruitment and retention of BIPOC educators. We're going to be using hiring data, exit survey data, employment demographic data, separation data, and retention data to kind of guide us in this work. Next slide, please. Our Tunde Adedoyan, who's our Director of Human Resources, is going to be leading this particular work here. I wanted to show these 2 performance indicators. We want to increase the number of BIPOC educators by 5% and establish those affinity spaces next year. This year, we want to put that plan together, right? And so that is another, that he's going to put together a committee. We're going to look at what the workforce diversity plan is and execute it for the next couple of years. And then we're going to try to increase that by 5% more the next year, by the 3rd year. Next slide. And these are all the action steps that go along with that. Next slide. And then the affinity spaces. You can go to the next couple of slides on these, and I'll talk about all the affinity spaces. Keep going. And the second recommendation, all right, we can stop here. So Dr. Fergus recommended that we build affinity spaces for staff as well as affinity spaces for students. So we're going to try to build out the Max Scholars Program. So we're going to work with Ms. Marsha Hicks to kind of do some piloting of what an expansion of that program looks like to get to his recommendation that we should lean in on their success. And then as we look at other opportunities to build affinity spaces, we want to look at our current clubs and organizations that are offered within our district and see what the room for expansion looks like. There are no percentages for year 2 because we want to do that scan this year to see what we have, and then we'll know better what percentage of students we want to move into those affinity spaces for year 2, and then we want to increase that by 5% based on whatever that number is for year 3. Next slide. There's the action steps again. And then for our intentional integration initiative, we still have to set up meetings with the ALS group to talk through many of these, but these are Dr. Fergus's recommendations. SMART goal for his first recommendation is we're going to work with the ALS group to examine integration models and make adjustments so that the factors where the greatest skewed patterns are weighed more. Next slide. His second recommendation, our SMART goal, is in partnership with the township, town South Orange and Maplewood. I'm sorry, the villages, that should be the village of South Orange. I apologize, South Orange. And the township of Maplewood, South Orange and Maplewood School District will continually monitor average household incomes and parental educational levels for the next 3 to 5 years. So we're gonna set up meetings and talk over with those leaders or whoever they designate so we can work in partnership with them. Next slide. The third recommendation is working with the ALS group. We want to prioritize integration in South Boynton and South Mountain over the next several years. He pointed out that we should probably stage integration in those areas because those are the areas that we have the largest gap. Next slide, please. And then we have to meet with the ALS group to see how to balance the reviewing of our withdrawal data with the pre-COVID numbers and the current pattern of withdrawals to see where patterns lie. And the final slide. The III plan needs to parallel integration. If you remember that slide, all those slides we did on the INRS and the integration plan, that is the plan that we're going to use to help meet this particular requirement. So as we're building that, the INRS piece, we're also helping to make sure we integrate our academic supports, and that's it. I went like 5 minutes over. I apologize.
No, thank you so much. That was an incredible amount of work, and just thank you so much for doing all of that.
All right.
I'll just turn it to the board to see if there are any questions. Board Member Wright?
Slide your chair up.
Thank you. Seems like a lot of the same information. And the plan doesn't seem to be very specific, but I'd like to ask a question. Could you define SMART goals and also whether the goals you are presenting are SMART?
Okay. So SMART goals have to be specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. That's what SMART stands for. And so these are the goals after in consultation with the team as we worked on. We feel like these are the goals that meet those specific marks when we talk about SMART goals.
Board Member Ecker, and then Board Member Duvall-Wilson.
So I have more comments, I guess, for, I think, the next go-around and probably more for Dr. Taylor. But in the draft that was shared with the board, there were separate line items, budgetary line items. I think being able to see one slide, it might encompass 2 slides, however you deem fit. But I think understanding that in kind of holistically would be really helpful to see in the next version. I apologize. Thank you so much. I should have said, I meant to say that was an incredible amount of information. So I appreciate you and Ms. Bodnar, everybody involved in doing that. The second thing, again, it's more of just a comment, and obviously related to the intentional integration recommendations. Obviously, we're viewing this from an a Dr. Fergus lens, but as you work with them and talk about weighted factors, one thing that I've discussed with Dr. Taylor, and, I think it's been brought up in FFT, distance, in my opinion, also needs to be weighted, as we've seen just from transportation this year, just from an operational perspective, but then also the financial impact of all of this, which of course goes along with the other recommendations within II that you're working with, working closely with town officials to kind of see the patterns over the next couple of years. So I think it would be just helpful to better understand that and think about that as you consult with Al's group. Thank you.
Thank you. Mhm.
Thank you so much. I know it's a lot of work, and just a couple of comments and questions. One, I was happy to see the SMART goals, bouncing off of the question earlier about SMART goals timing. I know that in year one, there's a lot of to-dos, and some of them seem to build on other goals, to-dos, other action items. So I think it could be helpful for us to see some timestamps in year one, especially for the curriculum and instruction priorities. I would assume that there's certain things, even though you're going in order of recommendations, there's certain things like recommendation 3 items might need to start before some of the things in recommendation 1. And knowing what your internal deadlines are for some of those action items would be really helpful as we move along in our committees. I'd love to understand, maybe now is not the best time, but I definitely would love to learn more about the stage integration priorities for Seth Boyden and South Mountain. I feel like this is the first time that we've heard this being described in this way for an integration goal, so I'd love to understand that better. Also, slide 52 had great representation of key performance indicators when it came to teachers and the percentage of teachers that needed to have a certain level for their, what was it called, teacher knowledge assessments. And I would love to see percentages like that for some of our other goals. So for example, when it comes to tracking students who are low track students to receive high quality instruction. How are you tracking that from a percentage standpoint? Does that mean 50% of students are getting C+ and above or B and above in their grades by the end of year one? So having some better idea of tracking student success metrics I think will be helpful. And then my last main comment or question is teachers. So I love the slide about teacher empathy and helping them with their social emotional mindset of students, but I also would love to see how we're supporting teachers' emotional mindset. I believe that was part of your SEL report in June, right? And so I think that knowing how, I mean, this is intense. And so there's definitely going to be a big shift for many teachers. And when you're thinking about retention, not just of our teachers of color, but of all teachers, on being able to evaluate and understand some of their emotional, as well, I mean, you've got professional needs here, but their emotional needs as well, to make sure that they feel like they're equipped to support students in this pathway. And of course, it's important for our teachers of color, but for all teachers.
And just to add to that point, thank you for that. And inside of the workforce diversity plan that's going to come out based on these recommendations, there will be more details in that. And adult well-being is definitely part of that. That's going to be in that particular plan. So thank you for reminding us of that.
How are you guys feeling about all the work that you have to do? Because year one, there was a ton of priorities. So it seems like some of it's underway,
Yeah,
INRS, which is good.
So,
but how are you guys feeling?
Yeah, so, I mean, we don't have a choice. I think it's been said over and over again how behind the 8 ball we are in kind of getting this work going. And we are, I think we've been reminded that it's, since between the first Fergus report and this first report, it's been 6 years, right? And so there is a sense of urgency amongst us that's why you saw a lot of detail in year one, is there is a sense of urgency to get some things done as quickly as we can, although maintaining the fidelity, realizing that it's going to be a 3 to 5 year plan, as he said in his report, but we're going to move with all deliberate speed to kind of get those things done that we can, because our students we need to have it, we have to have it done. So it's a lot, but we're gonna try to move as quickly as we can to start meeting those needs so that we can start narrowing some of those gaps, which I believe the community and you all have been demanding for quite some time.
Thank you so much. And just two other comments. I like the idea when you talked about the choice matrix, that you're going to pilot that first and just measure if it's working to make sure that we don't have bias during those practices. So I like the idea that you're going to pilot it first. And then the other, just to piggyback off of Regina, I think it would be helpful if we could get the year one financial information for FFT so that that can be factored into the budget as that budget planning is underway. So that would be very helpful. Board Member Gifford.
Hey, Dr. Gilbert. So yeah, no, I thought, one great part of the Fergus recommendations is the parent engagement, but then again, I think that even without the recommendations, that's something that we always talk about. How many campaigns have board members spoken about that, right? And really, if we're talking about it so much, we need so much work to do there. And so my question is, and not to put you on the spot now, you don't have to have the answer now, but what are we going to do drastically different to really increase that? Because I feel, we send out the email, nobody responded. We send the email out in Spanish, in Creole. I mean, that's nice, but that doesn't move the needle. And I wonder, not this is outside of the board purview, but I dropped my son off today. I think that interaction when parents are dropping off their kid, that's when you actually have the parent there. So, just wondering if trying to take advantage and leverage those moments where the parent is so close to the teacher or the school and trying to really hone in on getting that, because, the parents are there dropping off the kid. And I know I receive all these emails from the school. It's hard to keep up, and I'm sure people are. So I just was wondering, what are we going to do different this time, And not that you have to have the answer now, but...
I can talk a little bit about that. Actually, what you said about having parents, a lot of times they stand around after drop-off and talk and chat. At Clinton, when I was principal there, we used to have some of our main meetings right then and there. Right after the bell, the kids go off, they go up to the library. We did a lot with some of our struggling students where we would have parents come in, and then they could get the next train or go off to work or wherever they might be going. So you're absolutely right. We would get the biggest number of people kind of sometimes at that point in time. And we tried to keep them really short and sweet, and we fed them. we did. It's a great way to do it, and had coffee. The other thing we just are in the middle of purchasing right now and working with Keith Bonds is we found a software that has a screen, and I will give this to Mr. Vecchione, who brought this to us. There's a screen, and as for our multilingual learners and for some of our first-generation families, the person who's speaking will speak, and it'll bring it up in English for our staff, and then when we speak, it'll bring up in whatever their language is. And then we're also trying to purchase, I always at the UN they have the earbuds, and it comes in their language. We're also we're piloting that to see if we can use it with some of our students and if we can use it with some of our families. We're starting it off in the counseling department at Columbia and then seeing how it goes and that is actually ARP money that we thought that was a great opportunity. And if it works, we can expand and see if we can get at least in the counseling department at the middle schools and maybe one at each elementary school, because I know being at Clinton, we were the multi-language school, and still is now. That was hard, and we also had a lot of families within our PTA who spoke multiple languages, and we would have it during conference time. We would have them there, ready to go if a parent wanted an interpreter, and they would go in. Obviously the parent would have to be okay with it, but they would go into the classroom and speak with the teacher and interpret for them. We would use them for IEP meetings. So we're trying to get all of these different ideas and gather them from the other schools and share them. But I do think you're absolutely right. That's a nice key time to grab some people and do some quick meetings, but closed captioning, also putting on we're trying to put any of the professional development that we do, or not necessarily professional development, but like meetings that we have for parents, put them on the website so that people can resource back to it, and also do closed captioning for them. So we know what we've been doing, sending flyers out and things like that isn't working. We have to get super creative with it. And I was just with the counseling department with Columbia last week, and they came up with some really great ideas. So we're creating a plan with them to start really doing some parent outreach. And so I think in the next year you'll start to see some different, hopefully you'll see some really different and innovative ways to reach out to our families. Yeah.
And the only thing I'll add on that is that each of our schools this year had to have a family engagement goal as part of their 3 goals. And so we were very intentional this year by having our school leaders put in a family engagement goal.
Yeah, well, no, that's so great, because I just, from speaking with some teachers, it definitely feels with, they can do everything in the classroom possible, but if that parent engagement isn't there, so, yeah, but thank you so much. I appreciate that answer.
Yes, thank you for that presentation. I guess looking at the action plan, I can see that many of these, these year 1 through 5 steps fall under the umbrella of our different committees. Could we have, I guess, more of a breakdown of how some of those different action plans will fall under the different committees? Because I can see a lot of that definitely falls under curriculum, but I also look at the INRS also falls under that. Also, that will align with special services. So I think one of the things that would be really helpful would be for us to start to look at how do we break down these different action plans for our standing committees. So that moving forward, we can always go back to them. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Sorry for jumping topics here, because I'm going back to the III recommendation number 2. It says the pattern of average household income and parental education level should be examined over time, which is fine, in order to understand whether the III plan can be sustained. That's part I don't understand. I mean, what does it mean to sustain it? It's all the way down, I think, page 77 maybe. I mean, even if we have a 95-5 split or whatever it is, I mean, III will always be existing, unless the entire town is homogeneous in SES. Unlikely.
That was slide 6, right? Slide 6?
Slide 6 for us.
Is that a,
Does it have?
What number again? I'm sorry.
77?
I'm talking about what integration recommendation number 2. Got it. Yeah. So in Dr. Fergus's report, he said that he wanted us to look. His recommendation was to look at the patterns of the household income and the educational level, and see how that, whether based on that, we were going to see if our integration was going to actually be sustainable. Because if the house, as he talked about it, if the housing patterns and the parental educational levels change, that could, depending on what the data pans out, that could have an effect on whether or not we actually attain the integration goal that we're setting out to come. So basically, we pull that out as his recommendation, and we're going to have to look at that further. We're going to talk with the, like I said, the leaderships of the two, the village of South Orange and Township of Maplewood, but we're probably also going to have a conversation with the ALVS group to just kind of tease that out to make sure we're actually getting to what I think Dr. Fergus wanted us to do. Yeah.
Go ahead.
And just to add on to that, in FFT, I guess this is now 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, the demographer came to see us and he said the same thing. And I think we had asked Dr. Taylor to pass that information on to the ALVS group, to pass that presentation, which I believe he did, because he said that based on the housing patterns in South Orange and Maplewood, Even though there are a lot of new construction coming up with some affordable housing within those new construction, it was only going to add like 20 families or something. It was a very small number. And so he said in the next 5 years, we would start to see changes with our demographics and lose a lot of our lower SES households.
Ooh. Maybe revising the document to include the SMART goals. I think that's really important that they're included because these are really not SMART goals. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Oh. Yes. Yes, yeah, and I was going to say, we can talk about it now, but this is going to be a monthly meeting, so I think after this was the first time that we were hearing from the district after the equity audit report, and it's great to see all the thought and effort and plan that's in place to tackle these recommendations. We know you have a lot on your plate. So on a monthly meeting, during our monthly meetings, we can be more strategic going forward. Maybe we focus on specific recommendations. We'll brainstorm and figure out how we can be strategic month to month with what's being reported out and what we're discussing. So we'll take that offline. So thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. Okie dokie. So now we will begin our only public speaks. Thank you to folks in the community who have joined us this evening. The board has time limits that we've set by policy, so each individual will be given 3 minutes to speak. Please do your best to stay within the time afforded to you. So I'm just going to wait for this list of people and then we'll get it started. Thank you very much. Okay, first up is Jacob Chaffin.
I'm here to express my support for the work of the MAPSO Freedom School. The MAPSO Freedom School is a Black-led educator organization full of principled, anti-racist teachers, many of which grew up in this community and have dedicated their lives to the school district. They also serve the community in a myriad of other ways and that needs to be recognized. This includes in the summer of 2020, when they organized Teachers for Black Lives at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, and then also serving as doing professional developments in many ways that support the work of the Fergus report. I would just like to express that I hope the board is courageous enough to reject attempts to censure and silence teachers that are speaking up in support of Palestinian and Muslim community members during the ongoing genocide against the people of Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Next up, we have Stacy Lawrence.
Good evening. That was my former student, Bill Gifford. That's how old I am. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Stacy Lawrence. I'm a 25-year resident of South Orange, a veteran English teacher at Columbia High School. I also teach Hebrew school at Congregation Beth El in South Orange, and I am proud to be affiliated with MAPSO Freedom School. For the past few weeks, there have been inaccurate and false accusations directed toward the MAPSO Freedom School, an activist group that has been doing admirable work in this community for years. I understand the fear that some of my fellow Jews have been experiencing. These are difficult times for both Jews and Palestinians, and frankly, for all of humanity. On October 7th, 1,400 Israeli civilians were murdered by the acts of an extremist government. And since that time, over 8,000 Palestinian civilians have also been murdered by an extremist government. Over a third of those 8,000 were children. They were not involved in any war, they were children. The people continue to be met with more bombs, destruction, and devastation as they are told to evacuate south. There have been reports of children trapped under rubble, causing the streets of Gaza to smell like death. The MAPSO Freedom School has been organizing peaceful protests that call for teachers to teach peace and justice throughout the world. I am honored to have them represent in our community, and so should our school district. As a parent and a Jew, I am deeply saddened by such misguided slander, rumor, and aggression. Members and friends of the MAPSO Freedom School are calling out injustices, criticizing the most right-wing extremist government in Israel's history, and they are calling to let Gaza live. What is wrong with this? These are not anti-Semitic people. These are people doing critical work. These are troubling times. Let that not hinder our ability to see the differences between activism and hate. I am proud to be part of a community that encourages our children to speak out for the voiceless, which is why I am so disappointed by the hatred that I have seen toward the MAPSO Freedom School and toward other peaceful groups that are involved in this community. Let us call for peace. Let us want an end to death. Let us want the return of hostages and wrongfully imprisoned people throughout the world. I urge you to think critically, the entire community, about the words that are being used, the accusations that are being made, and the mislabeling of good people and good work. Think before you speak. Thank you. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Stacy. Next up, we have Ingrid Sahil.
Good evening. This is a letter that was sent to Dr. Ronald Taylor and all the members of the Board of Education in the Orange Maplewood School District. The People's Organization for Progress, a grassroots organization that has been for over 40 years fighting for racial, social, economic justice and peace, is writing to express our support for and admiration of the work of the MAPSO Freedom School. Given the challenging times that we face at the local, national, and international level, it is critical that we support MAPSO Freedom School in the kind of relevant work that it does. It is of most importance that we teach the truth about conditions that undermine the very existence of individuals, as we are witnesses to their occurrences. We support MAPSO Freedom School in their current efforts to examine the crisis in the Middle East through the lens of history. Only teaching the truth will serve as one of the keys in preparing our young people and communities to seek opportunities of engagement in processes of social change that will benefit all of us. The ultimate measure of man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Sincerely, Lawrence Ham, Chairman of the People's Organization for Progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. Chris Duran.
Good evening to the board. My name is Chris Duran. I was a graduate of Columbia High School in 2015. I've been a volunteer at MAPSO Freedom School for some years. I've been involved with cases to free U.S.-held political prisoners and prisoners of war, and involved with many other community efforts. The last time that I spoke here was in defense of Dalen Wilkins and the Wilkins family for the misconduct among the Maplewood and South Orange School District that they failed to hold accountable for some time. Prior to that, there was harassment of MAPSO Freedom School, which has been an organization that has been deeply rooted in the work of my peers and the work of myself, has been deeply influential in my work, and has been deeply influential in youth in this community in advocating for human rights here in our community, in New Jersey, and across the world. When we advocate for Palestinian human rights, we recognize that this is a group of people that have been fighting for their freedom for over 75 years, that have been fighting against colonization, the same way that when we recognize Indigenous Peoples Day here in Maplewood and South Orange, we recognize that Indigenous people have been fighting against colonialism for over 500 years. We recognize that African people have been fighting against colonialism in this country for over 500 years. And so when we want to condemn organizations that fight for the human rights of the Palestinian people and accuse them of hatred, we have to recognize that we are being hypocrites to our own standards when we want to commemorate some kind of standard of humanity for Indigenous people, or some kind of standard for genocide that happened 500 years ago. When we see genocide happening right now, when we see 8,000 Palestinians murdered in an entire week, there's no both sides. And when we have people that take that strong position on that, we can't just condemn them. And we also have to recognize that MAPSO Freedom School is a community organization. It's not endorsed by the Board of Education for a reason. It's largely because the school district has condemned that kind of learning in our district for so long. While I was in school, while my parents were in school, and my dad was getting bullied by, my dad who was from Chile was getting bullied by by white children his entire time in this district. This is the type of organization that provides a voice for colonized people in this community, that provides a voice for people across the state. And we will continue to organize in solidarity with them, regardless of whether the Board of Education endorses them or not, or provides them a space, because we will find them a space. All power to the people.
Thank you, Chris. That concludes our in-person public speaks, and I believe, Mr. Barnes, we have one virtual public speaks, Karen Kozar.
That community member is not online.
Okay. So that concludes our public speaks. Thank you very much. We are now going to move on to new business, and from there we will be adjourning to closed session. This evening we're actually we'll host closed session in here. So once we end the meeting, we'll just ask all of our community members to leave this space. So with that, we will move on to new business. Does anyone have new business this evening? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to make the following motion. The Board of School Estimate meeting will be held on Tuesday, November 28th at 6 p.m. The Board of Education will also meet in public session on Thursday, November 30th at 6:30 p.m. May I have a second? Great, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. That appears to be unanimous. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn into executive session at 7:34 p.m. to discuss matters of attorney-client privilege and personnel. The length of the executive session is estimated to be about 60 minutes, after which the public meeting of the board shall adjourn. May I have a second? Second. Thank you, Board Member Eckert. All in favor? Okay. Thank you. We will adjourn to closed session. Thank you all for coming and enjoy your evening.